the proposals that 13 European leopard nations get together and act as a kind of consortium and deliver armored vehicles together. What do you think about that proposal?
So, NATO allies and partners have delivered armored vehicles, allies just at the meeting we had this week. I think it was Slovakia that announced that they were going to deliver more armored vehicles. And we have also delivered a lot of advanced weapon systems, and we see that this is making a huge difference on the battlefield every day. I will not go into the exact specifics of the types of weapons we are considering, but allies are constantly considering different types of weapons. We are also in close dialogue with Ukraine. We had Minister Kuleba at the meeting in Bucharest. We meet in this, what we call the Ramstein format, led by the United States. And all in all, I think that what we have seen is an unprecedented level of military support. President Putin made two big strategic mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. The first big strategic mistake was to underestimate Ukraine. The courage, the commitment, the bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian political leadership. The other big strategic mistake he made was to underestimate NATO allies and partners in our unity and our resolve to provide support to Ukraine. So yes, I absolutely understand the need to discuss and to address the specific systems, but we have provided already a lot of advanced systems, including armored vehicles. And thirdly, one more point on this, is that it is important to discuss what kind of additional systems we should provide, and there's a constant discussion and dialogue with Ukraine on that. But I think as important as delivering new systems, it is extremely important to make sure that the systems we already deliver function. Because we have actually delivered a lot of systems. And they need, as you know, they need ammunition. They need spare parts. They need maintenance. So one of the huge challenges is to ensure that all the systems which are already in place are actually functioning as they should. That's a huge logistical challenge. I'm not saying not new systems doesn't matter, but I'm saying to ensure that all the systems which are in place function is extremely important, and we are focused on that too.
Okay, first Bob Walter, then the gentleman here, then the two gentlemen 5-6, and Dr. Atzbodin with the last question, I guess, because we have to close this session. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Please make it short.
Okay, Secretary General, thank you for your address. Robert Walter, I am from the European Security and Defence Association and also President of Eurodefense United Kingdom. We have seen the Ukraine crisis create unprecedented cooperation between NATO and the European Union because there is a common threat assessment in both organizations. And I think, and I would like your comments on this, that this is an opportunity. You are originally from Norway, I am from the United Kingdom, for the European nations in NATO to build a stronger European pillar using the resources of the member states of both the European Union and of NATO and the EU institutions themselves, and put us beyond criticism if, by chance, there should be a change of administration in the United States in 2 years' time?
So first of all, I strongly welcome stronger NATO-EU cooperation, and over the last years, we have been able to lift the NATO-EU cooperation up to unprecedented levels. On a wide range of issues, from cyber, maritime, resilience, and in many other areas. We work together in the Balkans. You have the NATO presence in Kosovo. We have the support in the EU diplomatic efforts. And also, as you alluded to, of course, the way we work together in providing support to Ukraine demonstrates how strong and how important the NATO-EU cooperation is. And this is something I have personally also strongly worked for all of my years as Secretary General. So that's obvious. Then I also welcome more EU efforts on defense, as long as that doesn't duplicate NATO efforts, because we need to realize that NATO remains the bedrock for European and transatlantic security. As long as European efforts on defense means things like, for instance, increased defense spending, any meaningful increased European efforts on defense has to come with increased defense spending. There is one organization that has been calling for increased European defense spending for decades, and that is NATO. So of course we welcome that Germany and other European allies spend more on defense. Good. If it means that European allies are providing more capabilities, more battle tanks, more ammunition, more readiness forces, also great. It's absolutely in line with what NATO has been asking for many years, and we see that allies are spending more, European allies are spending more, and they're also providing new capabilities. We strongly welcome that. And also, if European defense means that, for instance, you're addressing the fragmentation of the European defense industry, it's a great advantage for all of us. As we all know, the United States, they have very many battle tanks, one main type. In Europe, we have quite few battle tanks and 7 different types. So, of course, the cost per unit, there is no economy of scale, maintenance, spare parts, all education, all that becomes extremely difficult when we have this fragmentation. So all of these are extremely good initiatives when it comes to European defense efforts. What we must prevent is duplication and competition. So, for instance, to have another intervention force, so we have an intervention force, and that is the NATO response force. And every time Europe needs that force, we are there. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Kosovo, you have to remember that the Libya operation, that was not a NATO operation originally, it was a European initiative, and after some time they came to NATO and asked us for help, and then we supported the Libya operation. So I'm only saying that we have an intervention force, we have a command structure, and we should do a NATO command structure, NATO readiness force. So we should do nothing that is duplicating and competing with that. And then, more fundamentally, we need to realize that 80% of NATO's defense spending is coming from non-EU allies. So, of course, we welcome the efforts of the EU members, and I call on them to do more every day. But it represents 20%. And then one more thing on this is that yes, of course, there may be elections in both Europe and in North America where you elect people who are not, as I say, enthusiastically in favor of NATO. That has happened before, it may happen again. But if you are concerned about that, you should not do anything which is weakening the institutionalized bond between Europe and North America. If you reduce the transatlantic idea to kind of bilateral personal relationship, then we are vulnerable. But if we have strong institutions, and that institution is NATO, because that's the only truly transatlantic institution, then we can weather storms. The reality is that, yes, we had President Trump, and there were, what should I say, questions asked. But NATO survived. We actually strengthened the presence of NATO troops in Europe over those years. So, any indication that Europe can go alone can just weaken the transatlantic bond. So I strongly believe in NATO. I strongly believe in Europe and North America working together. I don't believe in Europe alone, as I don't believe in America alone. I believe in Europe and North America together in NATO, and we need to safeguard that. Thank you.
Congratulations, sir, for your speech. I'm Colonel Liasites, from Defense Attaché from Republic of Cyprus. And from my country, we strongly support this cooperation with Europe for Ukraine. My question is, as we have occupation from an alien, NATO alien, Turkey, that is a candidate country in Europe, 48 years now. Do you think that it's time to support Cyprus problem for the reunification of Cyprus after 48 years? Thank you.
So we strongly support the UN efforts to try to find a negotiated and peaceful solution. I think that's the only way to address the challenges and the unsolved issues in Cyprus, and that's also why we welcome those efforts. There have been different initiatives, and I think that remains the only way to solve the challenges and the conflict in Cyprus.
The gentleman, I think row 5 and 6 was, yeah, please. Dr. Atford, there's one, and then you close the session. Okay.
Thank you, sir, very much for a very good speech. Sverre Engenes from Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace. I've spent about 40 years in the Norwegian Armed Forces. And it's understandable that we're now focusing on the current and the short-term issues. But what are your thoughts for a new security architecture in Europe, considering that maybe over-dramatized a little bit, but the one we have is actually in shambles, where the CFE and a lot of the other treaties basically have been pushed aside, and as some have commented on both today and yesterday, we don't necessarily cooperate the way we used to, and what is then the future for us? Thank you.
One important element, part of a European security architecture, is NATO. And if anything, the war in Ukraine has just highlighted, demonstrated the importance of maintaining NATO as a pillar of European security. With North America, with Canada, with the United States, we see all the support they provide to Ukraine. We see that NATO has been able to significantly increase its military presence in the eastern part of the alliance to prevent escalation of the war. So I'm fully aware of that. NATO is not the whole European security architecture, because we have institutions as OSCE and so on, but an extremely important part of any meaningful European security architecture is NATO. And NATO is more vital, stronger, more agile than it's been for decades, because the war didn't start in February this year. The war started in 2014. That was when Russia annexed Crimea and actually started to control parts of eastern Donbass. Since then, NATO has we have implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense, the biggest adaptation of our alliance since the end of the Cold War, with battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance, with increased defense spending, with high readiness, and more U.S. North American presence. We have a US-led battle group in Poland. We have a Canadian-led battle group in Latvia. So we have more North America in Europe now than we have for many, many years. I say this because sometimes we speak about European security architecture, something abstract, and something also, yeah, for academics. So it's very good. But it's very much about NATO, and NATO is there more than we have seen for many decades. Then, of course, there are also other elements, and that includes not least Russia, how to relate to Russia. And that has been shattered by the war in Ukraine. For many years, NATO strived for a more constructive relationship with Russia, for dialogue with Russia. I was Prime Minister when President Putin and Medvedev attended NATO summits. I just came from Bucharest, as I told you, when I was there at the summit in 2008. President Putin was there. In Lisbon, Medvedev attended. That world doesn't exist anymore. because with the invasion of Ukraine, that whole idea of a meaningful dialogue with Russia is shattered. Also, it has been smashed, destroyed by Russia. At the same time, we need to maintain military lines of communications to prevent escalation, to prevent incidents. We saw the incident in Poland. We need to do whatever we can to have incidents, accidents that can spiral out of control. So we need military lines of communication. I see General Breedlove is here in the audience. He was active speaking to his Russian counterparts when he was Sakur, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. We need to have that lines of communications. And of course, we also need to continue to engage with Russia on issues like arms control. So the one part, NATO, is as strong as ever. The other part of the European security architecture, this cooperation with Russia, is not functioning. Russia has walked away from the meaningful dialogue, but we need a minimum of contact, military lines of communications, and, for instance, to address issues like arms control.
So there was, okay, thank you. So closing question by Dr. Atzpodin, please.
Hans Atzpodin, I'm representing the Federation of German Defense Industry and Security Industry. Secretary General, the question I have is regarding the Green Deal of the EU. The Green Deal has turned out to be a very powerful transformation agent for our societies, and it means that on the one hand, ministries have to become climate neutral. Companies like our member companies have to become have to get ESG conformity, which we are really doing. However, we are producing weapons, and our financial sector categorizes weapons, even if they are in order to help our armed forces to fulfill their NATO task, tend to categorize those weapons as non-sustainable. What can NATO do in order to bridge this kind of gap?
So you are raising a very important issue, and that is that I have also the defense industry, represented by you and others. They have raised with me several times. We had a big conference in Rome some time ago. I had meetings with a lot of defense executives, actually in Brussels just a couple of weeks ago, and they raised exactly the same issue, that they have problems with getting financing investments because they don't fulfill these ASG guidelines, and there have also been some questions about the EU taxonomy. We have engaged with the European Union on those issues, raised our concerns. The European Union is now looking into it, working on it, and some actions have been taken to make it easier for the defense industry to get finance. This is partly about government regulations, but it's also very much about what private financial companies decide themselves without any government regulations. So I think this is partly to address governments. We are doing that as an alliance and the European Union. They are very much aware, and they're working on the issue to try to avoid that kind of, as I say, unintended effects. And we need also to then address the financial sector, because it is absolutely there's no meaning in saying that we should make it harder, more difficult to invest in the defense industry. We need those capabilities. Of course, it's always nicer to invest in health and infrastructure and education. But when there is a full-fledged war going on in Ukraine, the way to save life is to give them ammunition, to give them air defense. And that's the brutal reality, like it or not. If you look at the opinion polls, people understand this. They don't regard the defense industry from NATO allied countries as something which is not sustainable. The reality is that the only way to sustain peace is to invest in defense. And rest assured, we are working hard on that. And of course, we have seen a transition where the defense industry was state-owned. Then many of them have been more private-owned. But of course, you cannot end up in a situation where the defense industry is not able to get private capital and then end all as state-owned again. Because the private financial market has some idea of what is sustainable. So they just have to change the idea of what is sustainable and make it easier to invest in the defense industry.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for your briefing and frank answers to the audience of the Berlin Security Conference, and we wish you good luck and Godspeed for the alliance driving forward and the cohesion of the alliance. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you.